I never thought recovery from an alien abduction would be harder than the abduction itself. Like, everyone talks about the experience, the encounter, but nobody tells you what happens after. Nobody tells you how you're supposed to live with this information, how you're supposed to function in a world that thinks you're crazy. I'm Amanda, I'm 31 now, and it's been 9 years since my abduction experience, 9 years of trying to piece my life back together. And I'm going to tell you about 3 things that literally no one prepares you for. First, the immediate physical aftermath and the desperate search for medical answers that don't exist. Second, the complete social isolation and the struggle to find anyone who won't think you've lost your mind. But before I get into all that and oh my god, where do I even start with this stuff? Let me give you some background, because this didn't happen to someone who was completely unprepared for weird experiences. And third, the long journey toward healing and acceptance that I'm still on, oh my god, it never really ends. Growing up in Henderson, Nevada, I was always the sensitive kid. I was seeing things that other people couldn't see, feeling energies that other people couldn't feel. My mom used to take me to doctors all the time when I was little because I'd talk about the shadow people I'd see walking around our house. My dad was more skeptical. He was an accountant for this big casino company in Vegas, very practical, very left brain, but even he started to wonder when I'd predict things that would happen. She was convinced there was something medically wrong with me, she was really freaked out by it. I remember when I was 8 years old, I told him that his boss was going to get fired, and 3 days later it happened. I had no way of knowing that information, but somehow I just knew it was going to happen. And it wasn't just predictions. I'd see people who weren't there. I'd hear conversations that weren't happening in this reality. My teachers at school started calling my parents because I'd talk to empty chairs or I'd answer questions that nobody had asked out loud. Everyone thought there was something seriously wrong with me. When I got to high school, this was Coronado High School in Henderson, I started researching psychic phenomena on my own. I was going to the Henderson Public Library every day after school, reading books about remote viewing, out-of-body experiences, all that metaphysical stuff that most teenagers weren't interested in. This was before all the consciousness content we have now on YouTube and stuff. I remember finding this book by Robert Monroe about astral projection, and I was like, oh my god, this is what I've been experiencing my whole life. Finally, someone was describing these experiences in a way that made sense to me. I started practicing the techniques he described, and I got really good at leaving my body consciously. By the time I was a senior in high school, I could remote view with pretty decent accuracy. I'd test myself by trying to see what my friends were doing at their houses, and then I'd call them and ask, and 70% of the time I was right. It was wild. College was where things really opened up for me. I went to UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and I double majored in psychology and religious studies. I was fascinated by altered states of consciousness, by experiences that mainstream science couldn't explain. I wanted to understand what was happening to me from both a scientific and spiritual perspective. That's where I met Dr. Margaret Caldwell, and she was doing research on anomalous experiences. She was this amazing woman, probably in her 50s, who had her PhD from Stanford, but was willing to study things that other academics wouldn't touch. She was the first professor who took my abilities seriously from an academic standpoint, Dr. Caldwell. Introduced me to meditation, to controlled remote viewing experiments, to consciousness expansion techniques. She had this little lab in the basement of the psychology building where she'd do these experiments with students who had psychic abilities. I started working with her research team when I was a sophomore. I was getting really good at it. I could remote view locations with about 70% accuracy. I could sense things about people that I had no way of knowing through normal means, like their emotional states, sometimes glimpses of their past experiences. Caldwell would have me do these sessions where I'd sit in this soundproof room with electrodes attached to my head, monitoring my brain waves while I attempted to remote view target locations. It felt like I was finally understanding what I was capable of. She was documenting everything, trying to understand the neurological basis for psychic phenomena. It was the first time in my life that my abilities were being taken seriously by someone with actual scientific credentials. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened during my senior year at UNLV. Nothing. I thought I understood the scope of what was possible, but I was so wrong. It was March 15th, and I remember the exact date because I had this big psychology exam the next day, abnormal psychology, which is kind of ironic when you think about it. I was staying late in the library, studying until they closed at midnight. I had spread all my notes out on this table on the 4th floor, trying to memorize all these different psychological disorders. I packed up my stuff and drove back to my apartment complex on Tropicana Avenue. I lived in this little one-bedroom place called Desert Springs Apartments, about 10 minutes from campus. I remember feeling really tired around 11:30, like unusually tired. Not just sleepy, but this deep, heavy tiredness that seemed to come out of nowhere. I got home around 12:00 a.m., and I was just exhausted. But it was a weird kind of exhaustion, like my body felt heavy and my mind felt foggy. I brushed my teeth, got ready for bed, and I remember setting my alarm for 6 a.m. because I wanted to review my notes one more time before the exam. I fell asleep probably around 1 a.m. I remember lying in bed thinking about the exam, running through different psychological theories in my head. The last thing I remember was looking at my digital clock and seeing 12:58. The next thing I remember, I was waking up, but I wasn't in my bed. I was lying on this cold metal surface in this room that was filled with this harsh blue-white light that hurt my eyes, and I couldn't move. Like, I could see everything. I could think clearly, but my body was completely paralyzed. It was the most terrifying feeling I've ever experienced. There were 3 beings in the room with me. They weren't the typical gray aliens that you see in movies. These were taller, maybe 6 feet, with pale, almost translucent skin that looked like it had never seen sunlight. Their heads were larger than human heads, but not dramatically so. Their eyes were bigger than human eyes, but they weren't those huge black eyes you see in popular culture. They were more like enlarged human eyes, but completely black, no pupils or iris that I could see. And their movements, like, oh my god, they moved in this really fluid way that wasn't quite human. It was like they were gliding instead of walking, and when they turned their heads, it was this smooth, controlled motion that looked almost mechanical. The fear was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life. It wasn't just psychological fear, it felt like it was being chemically induced. Like they were somehow manipulating my neurochemistry to keep me in this state of absolute terror, so I wouldn't resist what they were doing. My heart was racing, but I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything. They didn't communicate with me telepathically like some people report. They had these instruments that looked like they were made of some kind of crystalline material that seemed to glow with its own internal light. And they were taking samples, skin samples from my arms and legs, hair samples from my head. There was no gentle mental contact, no explanations, nothing like that. They just did things to me. I could feel them doing it even though I was paralyzed. It wasn't painful exactly, but I could sense the pressure, the intrusion. They used this device that looked like a long, thin needle made of the same crystalline material to extract something from my spine. I couldn't feel the physical pain because of the paralysis, but I could sense what they were doing, and it was terrifying. The worst part was this procedure they did where they inserted something into my nasal cavity. I could feel it going deep into my sinuses, past where any normal medical instrument should go. It felt like they were accessing my brain through my nose, and there was this intense pressure, this sense that they were implanting something. And as it went deeper, I started having these flashes of images, not from my own memory, but like I was seeing through their eyes, seeing other humans on other tables, seeing what looked like a vast collection facility. The thing they inserted felt warm and alive, like it was some kind of biological technology. During the whole procedure, which lasted maybe 2 hours, I kept trying to understand why this was happening to me. I mean, I had psychic abilities, but I wasn't anyone special. I was just a college student trying to understand consciousness, but they seemed very interested in my brain, in my neural patterns. They kept scanning my head with these devices that made this high-pitched humming sound, and then suddenly I was back in my bed. I woke up at 6:47 a.m. I remember because my alarm was supposed to go off at 6, and I was panicked that I had overslept. But when I checked my phone, I realized that somehow 7 hours had passed when it felt like I had only been asleep for maybe an hour or 2. And that's where the real nightmare began, the recovery process that nobody talks about. The first thing I noticed was the physical evidence. There were marks on my skin, small puncture wounds on my arms and legs that I definitely didn't have when I went to bed. They looked like injection sites, but they were in weird locations, like the inside of my elbow and the back of my calf. There was dried blood around my nostrils, and my sinuses felt completely congested, like something was lodged up there that didn't belong. I had a splitting headache that felt different from any headache I'd ever had before. It was this deep, throbbing pain that seemed to be coming from inside my skull, like pressure building up behind my eyes. And my spine hurt where they had inserted that device. But the psychological impact was immediate and overwhelming. I was in complete shock. Like I knew what had happened to me, but part of my brain was desperately trying to rationalize it away. Maybe it was a vivid nightmare. Maybe I had had some kind of seizure or medical episode. Maybe I was having a psychotic break. I skipped my psychology exam that day. I couldn't function, couldn't think straight, couldn't focus on anything except what had happened to me the night before. I called in sick to Dr. Caldwell's research lab where I was supposed to work that afternoon. I spent the whole day in my apartment researching alien abduction experiences online, trying to find other people who had gone through similar things. And that's when I made my first mistake. I told someone about it. My roommate Jessica came home that afternoon, and she could see that something was wrong with me. Jessica and I had been roommates for 2 years, and we were pretty close. She was studying journalism at UNLV, very rational, very skeptical of anything that couldn't be proven. I was agitated, I hadn't eaten all day, I was acting really strange. She kept asking what was wrong, and finally I just broke down and told her everything. The look on her face, like, oh my God, I will never forget the look on her face. It was a mixture of concern and, I don't know, like she was looking at someone who had completely lost their mind. It was this combination of fear and pity that made me feel like I had just destroyed our friendship in one conversation. She tried to be supportive at first. She said maybe I should see a doctor, maybe I was sick, maybe something had happened that I wasn't remembering clearly. But I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe me. She thought I was having some kind of mental breakdown. Over the next few days, I could see her pulling away from me. She'd give me these looks like she was afraid of me, or like she thought I was dangerous. She started staying at her boyfriend's place more often. She'd come home just to get clothes and then leave again. The dynamic in our apartment became so uncomfortable. And then she did the thing that really destroyed me. She told our mutual friends about what I had told her. But she didn't tell them the way I had told her. She told them that I was claiming I had been abducted by aliens, and she said it in a way that made it clear she thought I was having some kind of mental breakdown. Within a week, everyone in my social circle knew, and the reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Some people avoided me completely. Others would ask me about it in this mocking way, like it was a joke. A few people seemed genuinely concerned and suggested I see a therapist, but even they were clearly questioning my sanity, but nobody believed me, not one person. And I understood their reaction. I mean, if someone had told me they were abducted by aliens before this happened to me, I probably would have reacted the same way. But understanding their reaction didn't make it hurt any less. The isolation was crushing. I went from having this active social life to being completely alone. People who had been my friends for years started treating me like I was unstable, like I was someone to be careful around. I'd walk into a room and conversations would stop. I figured if there was something physically wrong with me, if I was having some kind of neurological issue that was causing these experiences, at least I could get treatment for it. People would whisper when they thought I wasn't listening, so I decided to seek medical help. I made an appointment with my primary care physician, Dr. Sandra Blackwood, and I went in there determined to be completely honest about what I was experiencing. I told her about the lost time, the physical marks, the nasal congestion, the headaches. I didn't initially mention the abduction part, I just focused on the symptoms. Dr. Blackwood took me seriously, which was a relief. She was this older woman, probably in her 60s, who had been practicing medicine for like 30 years. She found the puncture marks I had described, and she said they looked like injection sites, though she couldn't explain why I would have so many, or why they were in such odd locations. She did a complete physical examination, took blood samples, checked my reflexes, looked in my ears and nose. She ordered a complete blood panel, checking for everything from drug use to vitamin deficiencies to autoimmune disorders. She also referred me to a neurologist because she was concerned about the headaches and the memory gaps. The blood work came back normal. Everything was normal, which was both frustrating and confusing. The neurological consultation was with Dr. Robert Chen, and he was really thorough. He did all these cognitive tests, checked my reflexes, had me do coordination exercises. He ordered a CT scan of my head because he wanted to rule out any kind of brain injury or tumor that might explain the symptoms. When the CT scan results came back, that's when things got really interesting. Dr. Chen called me into his office, and he had this puzzled look on his face. He said there was some kind of foreign object visible in my sinus cavity on the scan. It was small, maybe the size of a grain of rice, but it was in a location that would be impossible to reach without major surgery. He showed me the scan, and I could see it clearly, this small, dark object lodged deep in my right sinus cavity. He said in 30 years of practice, he had never seen anything like it. It wasn't showing up as metal on the scan, and it wasn't in a location where it could have gotten there through any normal means. He scheduled me for a more detailed MRI, and when those results came back, the object was still there. But here's the weird part, it wasn't showing up as metal on the MRI either. It was showing up as some kind of organic material that the imaging equipment couldn't properly identify. Dr. Chen was completely baffled. He recommended surgery to remove it, and I agreed immediately. I was desperate for answers, desperate for some kind of validation that something real had happened to me. If they could extract this thing and analyze it, maybe I could finally have proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks later, but the night before my surgery, something strange happened. I woke up in the middle of the night with this incredible pain in my sinuses, like something was moving inside my head. It was around 3 a.m., and the pain was so intense that I thought my head was going to explode. I got up to get some pain medication, and when I looked in the bathroom mirror, there was blood streaming from my nose. Not just a little bit, it was like a faucet had been turned on. I spent about 20 minutes in the bathroom, bleeding and experiencing this intense pressure in my head. And then suddenly, something came out. It was small, maybe the size of a rice grain, but it was this weird crystalline material that I had never seen before. It was partially organic and partially something else, something that looked almost technological. It had these tiny filaments extending from it, and it seemed to pulse with its own internal light. I saved it. I wrapped it in tissue and put it in a small container, and the next day I brought it with me to the pre-surgery appointment. But when Dr. Chen did another scan before the surgery, the object that had shown up on all the previous scans was gone. He was completely baffled. He said that in 30 years of practice, he had never seen anything like this. An object that showed up consistently on multiple scans just disappearing overnight. He canceled the surgery and sent the tissue sample I had saved to a lab for analysis. The lab results came back 3 weeks later, and they were inconclusive. They said the material contained elements they couldn't identify, and the structure was unlike anything in their database. But they also said it could have been some kind of unusual biological byproduct, maybe from a sinus infection or some other medical condition. So I was back to square one. I had this physical evidence that something had happened, but no one could explain what it was or where it had come from. The medical establishment had done everything they could, and they had no answers for me. At this point, I was about 6 months into the recovery process, and I was struggling with severe depression and anxiety. I wasn't sleeping well. I was afraid to go to sleep because I was terrified of being taken again. I'd lie in bed for hours, listening to every sound, wondering if they were coming back for me. My grades were suffering badly. I was failing 2 of my classes because I couldn't concentrate, couldn't focus on anything except what had happened to me. My relationship with Jessica had completely deteriorated. She moved out of our apartment at the end of the semester because she said living with me was too stressful. That's when I decided to see a therapist. I found Dr. Lisa Thornfield, who specialized in trauma recovery, and I made an appointment. I was honest with her about the abduction experience, and to her credit, she didn't dismiss me immediately. She said that regardless of whether the experience was objectively real or not, the trauma I was experiencing was very real and needed to be addressed. Dr. Thornfield introduced me to EMDR therapy, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing, which is designed to help people process traumatic experiences. We worked together for about 8 months, twice a week at first, then once a week as I started to stabilize. The therapy helped with the immediate trauma symptoms, the hypervigilance, the sleep problems, the anxiety attacks. But it didn't help with the bigger issue, which was that I knew something real had happened to me that nobody believed. Dr. Thornfield helped me develop coping strategies for dealing with the social isolation. She taught me how to compartmentalize the experience so I could function in daily life. but she also encouraged me to find other people who had gone through similar experiences. That's how I discovered there's actually a community of people who have had abduction experiences. There are online forums, support groups, researchers who take these experiences seriously. Finding this community was incredibly validating. For the first time since the experience, I felt like I wasn't crazy, like I wasn't alone. Through these online connections, I learned that my experience wasn't unique. There are thousands of people around the world who have gone through similar encounters. The details vary, but there are consistent patterns: the paralysis, the medical procedures, the implants, the missing time. But there are also contactee experiences, where the communication is more telepathic, and medical monitoring cases, where people have ongoing contact after an initial abduction. I also learned about the different types of encounters that people report. Mine was what researchers call a physical abduction, where you're actually taken aboard a craft. Understanding that I was part of a larger phenomenon helped me make sense of what had happened to me. I wasn't just some random victim. There seemed to be some kind of systematic study or monitoring program going on, and I had somehow been selected to be part of it. But even with therapy and the support of the online community, the recovery process has been ongoing. It's not something you just get over. It changes you fundamentally: the way you see the world, the way you relate to other people, your sense of safety and control. I've had to rebuild my identity from the ground up. Before the abduction, I thought I understood the nature of reality. I had this rational, scientific worldview based on what I was learning in my psychology classes. I believed in things that could be proven, measured, verified. But after the abduction, I had to accept that there are aspects of reality that science doesn't acknowledge, that most people aren't ready to accept. Because once you've had an experience like this, once you know that there are intelligences out there that are far more advanced than we are, it becomes hard to care about the everyday things that other people are concerned with, and that's isolating in its own way. It becomes hard to get excited about career advancement or relationships or material possessions when you're carrying around this knowledge about the larger cosmic picture. I've learned to manage that isolation, though. I've learned to live in both worlds, the world of everyday human concerns and the world of expanded awareness. I finished my degree at UNLV, and I went on to get a master's degree in counseling psychology. I wanted to work with other people who have had anomalous experiences, people who are struggling to integrate things that don't fit into our normal understanding of reality. Now I work as a therapist specializing in what we call high strangeness experiences, UFO encounters, abduction experiences, paranormal events, spiritual emergencies. I help people navigate the aftermath of experiences that mainstream psychology isn't equipped to handle. And I've continued to have contact experiences, not abductions like that first one, but more benevolent encounters. It's like once you're on their radar, once you've been through that initial experience, the relationship changes. The fear-based encounters seem to be replaced by something more collaborative, more communicative. I've learned that there are different groups, different species, different agendas at play in the UFO phenomenon. The beings who abducted me that first time, I now understand that they were conducting some kind of research, some kind of genetic or neurological study. It wasn't personal. It wasn't malicious exactly, but it wasn't benevolent either. They viewed me as a specimen, as data to be collected. But the beings I've had contact with more recently seem to have a different agenda. They seem interested in helping humans expand our consciousness, our awareness of our place in the larger cosmic community. These encounters feel more like education, like preparation for something bigger that's coming. The recovery process never really ends. 9 years later, I'm still integrating this experience, still learning from it, still discovering new layers of meaning and understanding. The trauma has healed, mostly, but the expansion of awareness that came with it continues to evolve. One of the most important things I've learned is that healing from an experience like this requires community. You cannot do it alone. You need other people who understand what you've been through, who can validate your experience, who can support you through the difficult parts of the integration process. You also need professional help from people who specialize in trauma recovery. Regular therapy might not be enough because most therapists aren't trained to deal with experiences that fall outside the normal range of human experience. You need someone who can help you process the trauma without dismissing the reality of what happened to you, and you need to be patient with yourself. The healing process takes time, years, not months, There will be setbacks, there will be periods where you feel like you're not making progress, but that's normal. It's part of the process. Most importantly, you need to find meaning in the experience. For me, the meaning has been in using what I learned to help other people who are going through similar things. The abduction experience, as traumatic as it was, led me to my life's work, to my purpose. I now understand that these experiences, as difficult as they are, serve a larger purpose in human consciousness evolution. The people who have these experiences first, who go through the trauma and the recovery process, were like the advanced team, the ones who are paving the way for the rest of humanity. It makes the isolation, the disbelief, the struggle worth it when you realize that you're part of something much bigger than yourself, something that's ultimately going to benefit all of humanity. We're being prepared for broader contact, for our eventual integration into a larger cosmic community, and that gives meaning to the suffering. The recovery continues, the integration continues, and I'm grateful for every step of this journey, even the difficult parts. And if you're someone who's going through your own recovery process from a contact experience, know that you're not alone, know that healing is possible, and know that there's meaning and purpose in what you've experienced, even if you can't see it yet. Because it's led me to an understanding of reality and my place in it that I never could have achieved otherwise.